Jesus liked to eat. The disciples of John the Baptist noticed this enough to question why Jesus did not fast. Jesus' antagonists noticed enough to ask his disciples why he ate with tax collectors and sinners. They labeled him a glutton and a drunkard. His parables are often about wheat or fruit trees or banquets or vineyards. If he had not traveled by foot so far and so often, it is quite possible that Jesus would have been a little chunkier than he appears in most stained glass windows. Eating is rarely listed anywhere as a spiritual practice, but it should be. Some of the best stuff in ministry happens over meals. People share shockingly celebratory and devastatingly painful news. Creative ideas are hatched. Relationships are formed and edified. Substantial commitments are made. Mealtime is often where ministry happens. Jesus knows this well. He says to the disciples, "You give them something to eat." Unfortunately for them, Jesus is referring to a crowd of thousands. The pragmatic disciples recognize immediately that they have been asked to do the impossible, feed thousands of people with next to nothing. Surprisingly, even before Jesus tells them to give the people something to eat, the disciples had already done their due diligence, undertaking a quick inventory to discover nothing but 5 loaves and 2 fish. This seems to be the normal situation that we find ourselves in the church today. People are hungering all around us, hungering for a deeper connection with God and each other, hungering for purpose and meaning, hungering for hope that our politics will heal before the country and the planet slides further into ruin. Many are hungering quite literally for their next meal. The church has been called to feed all these hungry people with fewer loaves and fishes than we have ever had before. So the disciples are right to notice the limitations. We are not equipped to do what we have been charged to do. We do not have enough. We do not have enough to change our deja vu politics before the next election. We do not have enough to convince our fellow citizens that holding a president accountable to the law and the peaceful transfer of power is very different from persecuting your political enemies. I'm not even sure we have enough to build our own small community where everyone feels seen, heard, known, and respected. The disciples are right to notice the limitations. The wise thing to do would be to send people elsewhere, to whomever is serving some helpful fare at the local yoga studio, the coffee shop, the theater, or the pub. But a closer reading of Jesus' words here might be helpful. You give them something to eat. The church is not asked to fulfill every single need. The church is not asked to figure out how a few loaves and fishes are going to feed everyone. Jesus tells the disciples to bring what they have to him and share. The miracle of the meal with baskets full of leftovers is not the church's miracle. That's God's work. That's God's work. The church is as much a witness to that miracle as the people it is called to feed. Now, that should be enough to end the sermon right here with good news that I think most of us probably intuitively understand. We show up, we bring our best, and despite our many limitations, God does wonders with us. Yet these days, I think many of us are wondering if these kinds of miracles are still enough, or even if they are miracles at all. Miracles have kind of lost their shine a bit. as we've all been indoctrinated by our consumer culture to expect more than perhaps the planet or the church or our short lives are able to provide. But it's also possible that even without microwaves and cell phones and Uber and Amazon catering to our immediate needs, the crowds in Jesus' day were no more impressed or grateful than we are. I mean, the text says all ate and were filled, but it doesn't say they were satisfied or joyous or in awe. In fact, if Jesus' little multiplication miracle was similar to manna in the wilderness back in Moses' time, then it's likely that the people who ate, they grumbled about the lack of culinary choice involved. I mean, there's not even a gluten-free option in here. I think there's a reason that the rabbis prayed that old Sabbath prayer years ago. Days pass, years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. Even when we receive what we need, we often want more than what we are given. Now, on the face of it, there is nothing wrong with wanting more satisfaction in your job or in core relationships, a better work-life balance, more income or more room to support a growing family, more opportunities to travel and explore the world. There is nothing wrong with wanting more in life. In fact, when it comes to community, wanting more is often what leads to greater justice in the world. Wanting equal pay for equal work. Wanting the freedom to live where you want to live. Wanting your children to get the same education that other children get. There is nothing wrong with wanting more. It's just that when it comes to community of any kind, God's miracles seem to depend in part on what we bring to the table. I mean, Jesus doesn't make a fish appear on a platter out of thin air. He doesn't bake bread in some metaphysical mystery oven. He takes what we bring to him, the gifts of our lives, the fruits of our labors, and works those meager gifts into more than we ever thought they could amount to together. I think whether that sounds like good news or bad news depends a lot on your expectations. If you come to Jesus expecting filet mignon with a balsamic reduction glaze and a vintage red from the Rhone Valley, you are bound to be disappointed. What's being served here is more like chips and salsa. If you're expecting to eat and drink with people who think like you and act like you and are as put together as you think you are, you'll soon discover that the company that Jesus keeps leaves a lot to be desired. Pharisees and tax collectors and prostitutes and fisher people, Jews and Samaritans and Phoenicians. Whoever you don't like, I can almost guarantee they will be eating with you at that table. Even backstabbers and people who tell you to your face how much they love you and then talk about you behind your back. Jesus gathers them all at his table. But if you are one of those people who feels like your gifts might not matter, your life hasn't contributed what you had hoped, or someone who recognizes that the appearance of love and compassion and kindness and thoughtfulness and justice, however small, however fleeting, calls for celebration whenever it appears, I think you might be happier than you've ever been in this entitled world to witness grace that can happen here when just a few people show up. A few people show up, offering their hope for a kinder world. their love for the quirkiness of themselves and other odd people, their yearnings for justice, their hands, their heart, and even their pain as gifts to be received. For when the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over, the only thing that remains is the fruits of those meager gifts that we have brought and bestowed freely to each other. The Survivalist show Alone is streaming in its 9th season, and I'm totally captivated by it. 10 people, each of whom has substantial experience in primitive survivalist skills, are dropped off by helicopter in northern Canadian wilderness with just a few tools to assist them. Things like a tarp, a knife, a flint, a cooking pot, a bow and 10 arrows, fishing line, and fishing hooks. They have to build their own shelter, hunt, gather, and fish their own food, and prepare for a harsh and unforgiving winter amidst the dangers of polar bears and brown bears in the wilderness. What is striking against this unforgiving backdrop is the utter joy that hungry participants exhibit when an arrow brings down a squirrel or a fishing line brings in even a minnow-sized fish. When every meal is uncertain and every small bit of food evokes the deepest sense of gratitude expressed to the land or to the game or to the higher power, gratitude that is deep and real and unrestrained. I'd like to find that gratitude again. But like a lot of you, what I feel right now is the weight of the times we are living in. Unprecedented indictments of a president who was absolutely right when he said some years ago that he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and his supporters would still support him. And also a media machine that seems to have forgotten that there is other news happening that we need to know about on our TV screens. Hearing a daily drumbeat of terrible news that the oceans are hotter than they've ever been as we march toward what feels like inevitable destruction that so many of our fellow citizens pretend we don't even need to address. And the Supreme Court taking us back to post-Reconstruction times again, while I was in the middle of reading Richard Rothstein's incredible book, The Color of Law, about the systems of segregation that still affect all of us today. Gratitude seems nearly impossible to access. Joy out of reach. We are living in our own harsh and desolate land. I'm as weary as the rest of you, and I feel deeply discouraged, wondering how in the world are we supposed to do anything against this avalanche of aches with real predators out there who want to rip some people up. When the land that we're living in is so harsh and unforgiving, the gift of church can seem like not enough. Maybe it is a waste to bring what meager gifts we have, a little time, a little money, a little respect, and offer it to the whim of other people who have already proved ourselves to be untrustworthy simply by virtue of being human beings in the world. You know, then I noticed that Jesus performs this miracle right after he himself has withdrawn from the world after hearing the terrible news that John the Baptist has been executed by the tyrant of his time. He withdrew to a deserted place, the text says, and probably would have stayed there if he hadn't noticed all these people hungering all around him. Hungering for a deeper connection with God and each other. Hungering for purpose and meaning. Hungering for hope. That their politics would heal before their land slid further into ruin. Many hungering quite literally for their next meal. He noticed their hunger. It connected to his own, drew him out of himself. And maybe that is the lesson for us in this moment, friends. That hunger that we feel can drive us away from each other if we think we're the only ones who are suffering. But that same pain, when noticed in each other, can bring us together to share a meal. And while it might not be the most satisfying meal that we've ever tasted, it does promise to be enough to meet today's troubles. Enough sustenance, enough community, enough connection with the God who knows as well as anyone what it feels like to hurt and how to find us when we are there.